Hiya! Welcome! So this is me today jumping on a thread in the vinyl community here on YouTube, started by a great channel who I've been subbing to for a little while now, All the World's a Stage. He ran a great Bob Dylan related contest a few months back, really enjoyed taking part in that. And this thread that he started fairly recently piqued my interest. I think it was a lot more interesting than a certain other thread that's been doing the rounds within the VC lately, but that's just my opinion. I'll leave a link for All the World's a Stage's original thread announcement or thread beginning video at the top of the description, so please go and check that out. Give him a sub if you're not subscribing to him already, as is great. Okay, so what All the World's a Stage wanted people to talk about in this one was to name 5 artists, bands, singers, etc. who you've never owned a record by or never owned any piece of music, physical music by. The way I'm going to tackle this, I'm going to try and choose artists from each decade, from the 60s to the 2000s, including up to today, I suppose. Now, obviously, some of these acts won't necessarily be totally synonymous with that decade, but I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. So I've been thinking about this for quite a while, trying to determine who I can pick. I'm trying not to pick bands and artists who I outright dislike, just ones who, for whatever reason, I've never got round to buying a record or buying a CD of theirs. To this day, to the time of me recording this, I still don't own any physical music by them. Some acts I was thinking of right away, and then I remembered, well, yeah, even though I find some of these acts overrated, like Queen, Blur, Elton John, etc., I have owned singles by them in the past. So I'm trying to go all the way back to my teenage years when I first started collecting a lot of CDs, particularly singles. So there's some acts who I thought, oh, I don't own anything by them, and then I remembered, oh, but I did 25 years ago. Right, so I'll start in the 1960s, and this is obviously a vague kind of decade by decade choice here, as I know probably all of these acts have gone into subsequent decades and maybe even started in previous ones in some cases. But for the 60s, I don't listen to an awful lot of 60s music, so there was quite a lot to choose from, but I thought I'd choose a group who the vinyl community seemed to be absolutely mad keen on, and that's the Kinks. I've just never really got into them, and I'm not entirely sure why. I know that whichever Davis brother it was a great lyricist, and they had that sort of cheeky Cockney charm, certainly in their early days. I've just never been compelled to really listen to them to any extent. I think the one Kinks song that I remember hearing quite a bit, because I had a friend at school who did me a compilation, and it was one of his favourite songs that he put it on this tape for me, was Lola, which I know was early 70s, weren't it? And I've never liked that song. Probably sacrilege to a lot of you watching. And I know they've done other stuff previous, you know, Dedicated Follower of Fashion is one that springs to mind. Waterloo Sunset, nothing wrong with them. Just, I've never felt the need after hearing those to really kind of deep dive. Maybe I should, and maybe I will one day, but I don't feel I need to really. I think not the hype, but the constant sort of talk about the Kinks that happens within the VC is a little off-putting for me. It's like, well, if the majority like them, am I going to be that bothered? But I don't know. So the Kinks is my choice for the 60s. So moving on to a band who I've never bought any music by in the 70s. Now, I know these started in the late 60s, spun off from the New Yardbirds, but I think the decade they're most synonymous with is the 1970s, so I'm picking them, and that's Led Zeppelin. Now then, I grew up listening to a lot of Led Zeppelin, because I would say they were my dad's second favourite group after Pink Floyd. I've never bought an album by them. I nearly have before. I do like a lot of Led Zepp. I've not heard absolutely everything. Well, I might have heard most of it when I was growing up, but, you know, I'm going back some decades there. I think I find the prospect of listening to Led Zeppelin and maybe sort of trying to start a Led Zeppelin collection a little bit daunting, really. I get the feeling there's a lot of sort of self-indulgent, not dross, but plodding and overbearing sort of work in their catalogue, if you will. And I've just been kind of stopped, even though I've been on the verge of taking a punt on one or two of their albums before, and I may well do. I think out of all the acts that I'm going to mention in this video, the one that's at the top of the list for I must try and get something by them at some point will be Led Zepp, to be honest. I think the closest I've come to owning a Led Zeppelin piece of music was in the 90s when I bought the cover version CD single Whole Lot of Love by Goldbug. And I say it was probably the closest I've come because I think that actually samples the Led Zepp original, even though it's classed as a cover version. But I've never owned any Led Zeppelin records, albums, etc. Moving on to the 80s, and the 80s was the hardest decade for me to choose in this thread because I've bought a lot of albums and singles from 80s centric artists. It's a decade that obviously I was born in and grew up in and have very fond memories of. So a lot of acts, even ones who maybe I don't have in my record collection now, I know I will have had in my music collection years ago. So the act I went for, and I don't know, I'm probably going to go away from this video and think I could have picked someone better or a better known act, but I'm going with the Eurythmics for the 1980s. Now, I don't really like Eurythmics, apart from maybe one or two of their singles. There's something about them that just left me cold, you know, in that era in the 80s where duos were becoming really prominent in the pop charts. You had your synth duos like the Pet Shop Boys, Yazoo, Slash Erasure, Communards. Eurythmics to me, and I know you can't really call them synth pop or electronic strictly because they did all sorts really, they were quite eclectic, I suppose is something you can say in their favour. Just something about that combination just still leaves me cold and did back then and still does now, and I've got no desire to collect Eurythmics, listen to them particularly, even though I don't think they're an awful act. I don't think they're rubbish by any stretch. Annie Lennox, some of her solo stuff's alright. There again, I wouldn't rush out and buy it. Dave Stewart, he's done a lot with a lot of people, but nothing he's ever really done with anyone, including Lennox, has really interested me. So that's my 80s pick, Eurythmics. On to the 90s, and I'm picking Nirvana. Nirvana were like a phenomenon at my school and probably every school up and down the country, and certainly in the United States. Everyone suddenly wanted to be Kurt Cobain and had the Nirvana smiley face patch on the school bag and stuff like that. Now, I never liked them. Grunge music generally is not for me. There might be a couple of exceptions really, but nothing that I can think of offhand. I get what Kurt Cobain was trying to say in his lyrics, and you know, I get the impact that they had on certainly a youth subculture in the early to mid 90s. Just wasn't for me really. There again, I don't think they were awful. They should never have put anything onto the recorded medium, but I just never liked them. The closest I've come to owning a Nirvana release was, I remember buying, I think it would have been maybe 1997, the Foo Fighters CD single, My Hero. Great song. Obviously Dave Grohl has the Nirvana connection there, but I don't count that as me owning anything by Nirvana, because obviously it wasn't, it was Foo Fighters. That's as close as I've got really. And then lastly, the 2000s. Now I can think of quite a few for this. I suppose it's 2000s to the present day really, as this is my fifth and final choice. But I decided I would go with Coldplay. Coldplay are very Marmite, aren't they? I know Rob Walker is a fan, and I know Jason Clough, my co-host of the old Sodcast, was a fan in their early days, but can't stand them now. I'm not bothered about collecting any of their stuff. I don't like them generally. I find them kind of up their own arse. Chris Martin just comes across as like a kind of younger Bono, and I don't mind Bono, but you know, if you're gonna imitate him, I think that's a bit sad really. There's worse bands out there. I nearly went with Keane, but I felt I better not choose them because I just can't stand Keane. I think they're absolute crap and I'll just be ranting about them. See, I feel like I'm going to do it now. So I thought I'd go with Coldplay, who, yeah, one or two of theirs I think are alright, singles wise, but don't want to own any of their albums unless I saw one going really, really cheap somewhere. I'd take a punt on it, but even then I'd probably be in two minds. The closest I've come to owning Coldplay, whether you can count this, but I've got the Pet Shop Boys cover of Viva La Vida on a Pet Shop Boys album. It's a bonus track on a second CD. Great cover version that. It's a good song that. I'd say if I had to pick a Coldplay single that I liked, that would be one of the few that are up there really. But the Pet Shop Boys cover is really good, and it's kind of medleyed with domino dancing as well. But there we go. I hope I've kept this relatively positive, this thread. and not just totally slagged off everyone. You know, I like to think there's sort of good things, even for me, even though I don't really have any interest in any of these acts, apart from arguably Led Zepp, who I kind of do want to get into to some extent. But thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this thread response to All the World's a Stage. I want to say special thanks, as always, to my wonderful subscribers and generous patrons. Please see all my usual links, including Patreon and the Facebook group, down in the description text box. I'm going to go now. I'm going to go and buy a Eurythmics album, Coldplay album, Led Zeppelin, The Kinks, and Nirvana. No, not really. But you never know, if you see any of those in an upcoming records roundup, then that'll render this video obsolete and out of date right away. But let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure there's plenty of fans of all those acts who are waiting to argue with me and tell me why I should be listening to albums by those people. And I do hope that all of you will join me again next time for my next thread response in the vinyl community video. Cheers, everyone. See ya!